Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back for another episode of the Freight 360 podcast. If you are brand new here, you found us on a fun episode. We're going to talk about the freight market. It's obviously been an ever-changing thing, and we've got a special guest coming back with us this week. We'll get to Dean in a second. Continue to share us with all your friends. Send us all your questions. Leave us reviews on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google, wherever you want. You could, write a review on Reddit for all intents and purposes. We just like getting the word out there. So, But welcome back. If you're been with us for a while, we appreciate you continuing to join us. So we've got Dean Croke from DAT with us again. He's been on a few previous episodes. Dean, welcome back. How are you?
Yeah, good. Great to be with you. My favorite podcasters. It's good to be with you guys. I love this show.
We love having you on. So we've had a long lasting partnership with DAT and everything from showing folks the best tools out there and having some industry experts come on to talk about what's going on in the freight world. We appreciate it and look forward to another great year with you guys. So I'm curious. So give a little sports recap here. Did you guys? I would hope. Did you guys watch the Super Bowl?
First half. I did.
Did you say first time, Dean?
Yeah, it was halftime happened at bedtime, so I had to go to bed.
Oh, the first half. No, I
watched the first half, and then it was bedtime, so I was done.
Yeah, I thought you said it was your first time watching one. I was like,
no,
you living under a rock?
Yeah.
No, it was. Well, the Bills weren't in it, so and the Patriots weren't in it. If you're
that was my first time without Tom Brady, so I was kind of bummed. Well, not the first time, but it's kind of. For me, living in New England, it's like Super Bowl or any big sporting event's always got a Brady in it somewhere. So,
yep, yeah.
But I heard there was a little bit of controversy towards the end, right, with some of the calls.
Yeah. So at halftime, the Eagles were up by 10 points, and by the end of the game, the Chiefs came back, and the game's tied up at was it 35-35?
Yeah.
And then super high scoring game. And then on within the final minute, I think it was 40 seconds left 2 minutes left, whatever it was. There was a holding call against the Eagles, and it put it basically, instead of punting away, it put Kansas City easily in field goal range, and then they were able to go up even further and kneel it out for a game-ending field goal.
Yeah.
But there was controversy. Was it a hold? Was it not a hold? I mean, it was just, I don't know.
I watched it on replay, and it looked like they missed some earlier. It just seemed nuts. Sorry, Benjamin.
No, I was just going to say they had I listened to Pittsburgh radio, and they had Gene Steratore, the guy who the
rules analyst.
And he's from Pittsburgh, so he's on there a lot. And he had said basically his opinion was that hold was a hold. And he said why he thinks everyone got as pissed as they were was because there was a similar hold that wasn't called on Kansas City earlier. And he makes a good point. And he's like, look, calls will be missed from time to time. They're human beings. He's like, but if you miss a call, that doesn't really justify not making the right call in the future, right? And he's like, I get it. But at the end of the day, that's what a lot of the controversy, I think, was. Is that
consistency is what it is.
Yeah. But it's if you're the ref, do you not call it when you when you see it? Then again, I don't know.
Well, the same concept applies in baseball too. So if you're an umpire behind the plate and you're calling strike or ball, and people are like, well, they were kind of loose on the strike zone for this team. Now they gotta make it up on the next guy, and it's they don't, because those umps are rated on their accuracy. Mm-hmm. So if they make up a bad call with another bad call to even it out, they lower their overall accuracy, and they're not going to maintain a position behind the plate there. So I get that. But if you're a Philly fan, you're frustrated. I saw
The kid breaking the TV.
Did
you see that video?
No, I didn't.
There was a viral video. This kid looks like he's like 15 or 16, and he's at a party, right? And they're all in front of the TV, and he literally just loses it, throws the remote through the TV, and rips the TV off the wall and just slams it when he's just like screaming. It was nuts.
Philly, man, they're a different breed. So all of our fans out there and listening from New Jersey, South Jersey to be specific, the Philly area there. We're here for you. You guys are crazy.
Congratulations. Yeah.
So either way, it is what it is. I feel like if you, like, I saw a couple of plays that are calls, I think they were missed earlier on too, but it is what it is at the end of the day. Pat Mahomes is fun to watch. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
Just because you're up, a team's up by 10 at halftime, don't forget 28-3, Tom Brady back in 2017, right? Like the greatest comeback in the Super Bowl. It can happen.
In another level. Exactly. I think Mahomes is up there in the category of Brady, of Peyton Manning.
I saw a comparison at the age of 27 where they both were, and they like both had 2 Super Bowl rings, but like Mahomes has over double like the touchdowns and yards. He's got offensive player of the year. He's got I think the MVPs were the same, but his stats are like beyond where Brady was at 27 years old. And if he continues down that path and can have an elongated career, he's like undoubtedly is going to surpass Tom Brady as the GOAT, but we'll see.
And here's the thing, and again, it's a long way from that, but I also just feel like there's that untangible thing when you watch him play where like he just finds a way to win, right? Like, and again, like you saw that, I think also in the AFC Championship game, like just finds a way. And again, there was another call in that game too, but again, I just feel like watching him is like watching like one of the great quarterbacks where they just find a way, no matter what, to get that extra down, to get the extra yards, to make the other team make mistakes, whatever it is, right?
Yep, absolutely. So, and, also if you guys don't watch golf, in the same weekend in the Phoenix area was the Waste Management tournament, which is at TPC Scottsdale. Scheffler won, right?
Yeah. 19 under.
But could you imagine being just in the Phoenix area last weekend? Like, just absolutely absurd. I had a guy I know, he went to the Waste Management tournament, and he sent a picture. Like they like went to a bar afterward to grab just like it was like 3 guys that each got a drink, and the bill was like $100, and so you're paying like over $20 a drink. Plus, they had like these. It was like mandatory gratuity was added on their tab, like a technology fee, and like all these other fees. And I'm like, wow, like they know it's supply and demand. Like people are going to drink their beers, right?
Yep.
It's got to charge them for it. But I bet it had to just be absolutely insane just to be in that area. So crazy.
Yeah, a little bit of price gouging by the sound of it.
Ben, I'm curious. You're big into golf. What makes the Waste Management tournament like so rowdy? Like, it is known as like the craziest party in golf every single year.
I really don't know.
Like, I know Tiger Woods had a hole-in-one there like early in his career, and I don't know if that's when it turned or what, but it's crazy.
Is it like one of the early ones in the season? It's hot and
it could be that too.
Yeah,
because it's early on.
Yeah,
but it's historically known as like just the biggest party in golf tournaments. So.
Yeah. I mean, it even says
water bottles and beers everywhere.
It says, it's like it's earned its nickname as the greatest show on grass and made it one of the most popular events on the PGA Tour calendar.
Fascinating.
Good stuff. Well, that's there's your recap on sports. You won't be hearing me talk about football for quite a while here. I'm sure you'll get my off-season stuff and who's moving around where, but we'll get into the episode today. So we haven't done a market update in
about a year.
It might have been last year. Yeah.
Wow.
We had Ken Adamo on the last 2 years. We'll have to get his take later this year on what's going on, but you look at it. So Dean, to kind of get your perspective here, I'm going to start big picture. So 6, 7, 8 months ago, like freight was booming. People were making lots of money. Rates were high. And it seems like everyone and their brother was like either starting a brokerage, a trucking company, a dispatch service, whatever they could do to get their hands on the pot. And then you get towards the end of the year and it's like black and white, night and day, what the market has looked like.
Right.
And rates have gone down. You get a lot of these trucking companies that they were not cash healthy. They've got debt, they've got all these notes on their trucks and whatnot, and they don't know how to figure out what their cost per mile is or their cost per day and stuff like that, and they just start going out of business. And capacity has gotten loosened, even with freight volumes. It seems like we're going down, but so that's what I've seen. But from an analytics standpoint, what happened between like June of 2022 and now? We're in February of 23.
Diesel hit $5.80 a gallon. Diesel hit $5.80 a gallon. That was the big thing that happened in July of last year. But if you think about where we were in July, we were only 3 or 4 months into this freight cycle, and so we're only just over 12 months into this current freight cycle. And when I say cycle, in the downswing, the downside of the freight cycle, it's already starting to show signs of bottoming out. So the message here is that this is a much shorter freight cycle than we've ever seen before, which is, I think, an emerging trend. So normally freight cycles 18 months to 3 years. Current freight cycles seem to be very short, but have a lot more amplitude, both on the way up and the way down. So of course, we've had some unprecedented things here. None of us predicted that Russia would, invade the Ukraine and diesel would jump to $5.80 a gallon and be north of $5 a gallon for a long period of time, which squeezed a lot of carriers out of the industry that were, just getting by. But of course, that coincided with the freight market cooling and spot rates dropping almost $1 a mile over that period. So when you combine the fact that diesel went up, everyone's operating costs went up about 25 cents a mile, spot rates dropped $1 a mile, suddenly you've got people that were not good at managing costs, didn't have a good handle on what it really cost to run a truck, suddenly realizing that paying 3 times for a used truck that's out of warranty, 30 grand a year for insurance, suddenly it's a numbers game, and the numbers didn't add up. And that's why you saw a lot of carriers. The peak in exits in the industry based on the government data was October, November last year. And since then it's flatlined and carriers are starting to come back to the market. So I think there was definitely a flight from independent contractors who'd bought their own trucks during the pandemic back to leased on owner operators working for larger carriers, running for about $2. The average rate for a power only guy working for a large fleet's about $2 a mile. If you've got your own truck, your operating costs are about $1.80 a mile. So there's a good margin there if you're leased on and running for a big company because you've got access to their fuel purchasing program and other things. So that's been the big shift, is the rates down, costs up.
So question about that, right? And because we're talking primarily about the demand side, right? The trucks that are moving the quantity of freight, but what has the other side of that equation look like over this time? So the amount of actual freight being moved. I know, pre-pandemic, going into the pandemic, we stopped buying services and started buying goods with all of our money, meaning we didn't go to restaurants, we didn't go to concerts, we didn't do anything outside. And we still consumed a lot of goods and food, but we were buying them in different places. That created disruptions in inventory and even just routing of supply chain. Where we bought food was different, right? So what has that looked like? And then on top of that, you have the government increasing interest rates so that people's purchasing power goes down so that they intentionally buy less goods. How has that factored into it on the supply side?
It's made a substantial impact at a commodity level. So if you think about big picture, one of the best indices came out today from Professor Jason Miller, which is the Michigan State University Truckload Ton Mile Index, based on 41 freight producing commodities, basically flat year over year. So tonnage, so the volume of freight moving is flat. It has tailed off in the second half of last year. Even the ATA Truckload Index confirms much the same. So I think volumes are relatively flat, but there's a real shift in those volumes. You've seen, we've got a lot less retail imports coming in. Volumes are down based on January data from IHS Market. Volumes are down in January. Oh, they're up in January slightly, up about 5%, but down 17% year over year. But the big thing that's impacted truckload is furniture imports as a direct impact of the decline in housing sales and higher interest rates. So that the single family housing.
Thought about that. That's interesting.
So furniture is 12% of import containers last month. The next nearest was plastic products at 5%.
Wow.
So furniture has always been about double the volume of the next nearest commodity of what comes in those containers.
So question, what did that volume look like? Did it go, because I would assume it went down because less people are buying houses, because I've looked at the real estate numbers.
Yeah.
So
if you've got an exposure to retail imports as a carrier or a broker, those volumes are down 31% year over year.
So what's crazy? So, but if their overall volumes are flat, what is making up that shortfall?
Right. So industrial production is still pretty strong, has been pretty strong, although there's some signs of it weakening. Industrial production, so remember, retail imports on the container side at best account for about 10% of truckload volume. On the industrial economy side of our freight market, about somewhere between 55 and 60% of ton miles come from industrial production.
Can we have some
building
examples?
Things.
Yeah. So what are some examples of commodities that are shipped truckload that fall into that class?
So anything to do with building and construction, air conditioning ducts, machinery.
Okay.
Machinery imports are way up this year.
What types of machinery? Are we talking what?
Backhoes,
what is
skid
that?
steers, bulldozers, anything to do with construction.
Equipment.
Yep, heavy equipment.
Okay.
One of the biggest movers is 100 horsepower tractors, which can go in a dry van or a flatbed. Or dry van's a bit questionable without the tie downs, but a lot of from Japan in particular through Baltimore, surging volumes of 100 horsepower tractors. So there's some things that are really moving. What are the
uses of a 100 horsepower tractor? What are they used for?
During the pandemic, it was theorized that these are a lot of the hobby farmers, that were buying little tractors for orchards and things like that. So I'm not dug into that, but that's one of the categories that's growing.
I was just curious. I'm 100 horsepower tractor. I'm that seems like a lawnmower, basically, right?
It's a bit
large
bigger.
Yeah.
So if you break it all down, one of the biggest things that's impacting truckload right now is declining housing sales, because it's not just flatbed lumber and roof shingles and things like that. It's container loads of washing machines and dryers and electrical appliances that dry vans move once the house is built. I think that's going to be one of the biggest things we've got to watch. And the new numbers are out for January. They're out tomorrow from the US Census Bureau. We'll have a feel for where that's at. But we are building about 30% fewer single-family homes than we did a year ago. We're back at 2019 levels, to give you a sense of what that looks like. So we were building about 1.2 million homes a month at the peak of the building craze about a year ago. Today it's around 890,000, and that's where it's forecast to be this year. So it depends on the commodity that you're hauling as to what your fortunes are like. So right now, if you go to the southeast, you see really good volumes of flatbed moving, steel and lumber, because there's still a lot of building activity going on in your home state. So I think it really depends where you are regionally and what you're hauling as to what your fortunes look like. So clearly,
and I like the way. I was just going to ask you to that point, and I even like the way you phrase that. Right, your fortunes are likely tied to the commodity you're hauling. So, for most of our audience that are brokers out there, if you were a broker, where would you have your salespeople prospecting? What commodities and what industries would you have them go after?
So, if you're into the specialized area, heavy haul, we're heading into peak machinery import season. So, Tacoma, Galveston, Houston, New York, Savannah, Baltimore. Baltimore is probably the biggest for roll on, roll off. Right? So all of those ports are going to see fairly steep volumes in the coming months. We're ahead of planting season. So if you're thinking immediate, the Southeast we start to see steel production. The Southeast is our number one steel production region in the country. So you're going to see good volumes of steel coming out of Montgomery and Alabama, and Georgia, Mississippi to a degree. It's also our biggest area for producing lumber, dimension framing lumber, the southern yellow pine that grows the fastest and has the lowest labour cost in the southeast. It's also where a lot of that, you would have read about this week, we've got exports to Mexico are at 30-year highs of southern yellow pine. So there's a lot of flatbeds moving to El Paso and Laredo. So
you did an article on that last week on flatbeds and increased demand in Laredo and where the rates per mile were at highs.
We just see incredible volume moving from Houston to Laredo. It's like one of the busiest lanes. It's like Houston to Dallas and Houston to Laredo are like two of the really hot flatbed lanes. So I think there's an overall trend of we're exporting more to Mexico, they're exporting more to us. So I think there's really going to, if you think about prospecting, I think as supply chains de-risk from China, you're going to see a lot more volume across the southern border, without doubt. Some of those markets around San Antonio, they seem to be having a lot more spot market volume over time. So there's a couple of areas that I think are going to be particularly good.
I wanted to break that down real quick to what you said, because I don't know that a lot of people understand, like the decoupling of supply chains with China. The big risk, right, was when it's that far away, when they got disrupted, we had this huge issue starting them again, right? Because it's so far away in the time lag that a lot of, companies in the US are trying to source things either domestically now, or at least a larger portion, or closer, like you said, in Mexico.
Yeah. Well, they call it China plus one, which is where we're still going to have our basic supply chain with a low-cost producer, but then we're going to have a backup plan. We're going to have some redundancy in our supply chain, which could be, a friendly supplier like Mexico. It could be Canada, or it could be Southeast Asia like Vietnam, which is also seeing increased volumes. And Southeast Asia, if you think about it geographically, Southeast Asia imports can get to the East Coast quickest via the Suez Canal, as opposed to the Trans-Pacific to the West Coast and then through the Panama Canal. So there's a shift in where imports are coming from, which impacts which coast they go to. And then you're seeing this nearshoring effect here, where people are looking for more, resiliency in their supply chain, so they're not completely exposed like they were to China. But the other thing, though, guys, is it's not that easy to change your supply chain. And it's very commodity specific. So if you take an iPhone that's got parts in it from dozens and dozens of countries and it's very labor intensive, it's probably not going to move away from China, right? But if you take something that's really easy to build, that's kind of a cookie cutter, that, I don't know, I can't think of an example that's immediate. Someone said on a show the other day, Matthew Leffler said his Barbie doll is probably a really good one. Sorry, his daughter's Barbie doll is going to be one that could easily, be clear, is one that would easily go to Mexico to be built. So I think it's commodity specific. And you've got to remember that why this is a big deal for everyone listening is about 80% of all the imports coming across the border in Mexico are land-based. It's truckload. Now, some of that's going to come across the border and be, maybe get loaded into intermodal containers on some of those big trains that run out of there. But I think there's going to be a lot more volume over the years on that southern border market. And you've got to watch the trade balance, because you've got to get to that market to come back out, because there's a fairly big distance involved if you're thinking about deadhead miles.
So let me ask this. You hit on tonnage and how you said it remained flat.
Yep.
If we look at like a specific month, are you privy to when the peak was? Which month was the peak in the last couple of years, and what month has been the bottom or the lowest?
The lowest was certainly October, November last year. There's no question about that. June was what we saw as being the busiest period, especially in the spot market. June was when we saw most of our activity. And that's what we saw even the year before, as people pulled forward a lot of their retail imports. We saw a lot more activity in the spot market in the middle of the year than we would normally see. So I think that fits with how a lot of brokers saw the market. They saw a big shift in October, November downward.
Yeah, because typically, and I saw a lot of that. I do a lot of drayage and I do a lot of import
Yep.
work. Was a lot of companies in preparation because of what happened the year before didn't want to be caught without enough inventory for the fourth
Right.
quarter. So they
Right.
were bringing in things in July and August that they normally would wait until the third and fourth quarter. So you never really saw
Right.
this huge peak at the end of the
We didn't.
year where
Yep.
they normally do because they just started the year earlier.
And I think the same thing's happening now. So if you think about, what drove that East Coast shift in imports from the West Coast, well, it was two things: congestion. This time last year, there were 109 vessels waiting to unload. It's zero today. There's nothing. No one's waiting. But the second big thing was the ILWU contract that expired in July still hasn't been ratified, and they're only just now talking about getting back to talking. So if you're thinking about where do you route your imports for summer and fall season, what are you thinking? It's the same thing as last year. You went away from the West Coast before you were worried about the strike, possibility of strikes and go slows. So I think that's why if you listen to the West Coast port people, they're a little bit nervous. Gene Soroka said on a press release last week, "Don't bet against LA." They got a lot of work to do to bring that tonnage back to the West Coast. So I think we're in a position now where the trend from last year around imports increasing on the Gulf Coast and East Coast, that will continue. To your question about where would salespeople be watching, I think we're going to see a continuation of that this year on the
So,
import
question.
side.
What percentage of truckload freight is from imports? Like, what percentage of
Yeah,
the cargo that comes into the US makes up the truckload market?
it's about 10% at most.
Okay. And you're
So
saying, and again, okay, go ahead.
right,
I'm sorry.
right. But why it's a big deal is whenever you have congestion and surging volumes into ports, it overwhelms the contract freight infrastructure, both rail and road. And what we see is a relationship between surging volumes and congestion and spot market increasing volume.
The rates go up as soon as you have the
Yeah, right,
congestion and it pulls on it,
right.
right? And that affects everything, right? Because a lot of the warehouses along California is where these
Yep,
imports
yep,
go. They don't go directly into the country, and then
right,
all of those lanes
right,
get
right,
eaten up, and then there's no capacity, so it drives the spot
right.
market up.
So that's what happened. Yeah, we ran out of
Yep.
space to put
Mm-hmm.
them. Yep, yep.
So what I mean,
So
we're in February. What would you project the middle of the year looks like? And I know, again, whenever we're predicting something, there's not like a perfect science to it. There's a little bit of gut instinct and intuition that goes into it. But what would you say looks different, and what do you think looks the same at the middle of the year?
I think it's going to be. I think this year will be pretty. My gut tells me it's going to be flat again, but with a little bit of a speed bump in the middle of the year because of produce season, right? So I think we're going to. We have always said we'll have a much quieter first quarter than normal because of the whiplash effect of all of the activity last year, and then we'll see a pickup in import in spring and summer activity. There's more freight moving in the second quarter and third quarter, but I think that'll even out the slow first quarter. So that'll be relatively flat throughout the year is how I see things. We don't see the market turning until on the contract side the middle of the year, whereas we see the spot market starting to turn at the end of this quarter. It's already showing signs of flattening out right now. If you're in flatbed, rates are already starting to head back up again.
So good news, right? Good news for the carriers that likely towards the end of the first or going
Right.
into the second quarter, we're going to start seeing spot market come up. And then the contract market that is still
Yep.
above the spot, which it shouldn't be because
Right.
economically, just
Right.
for the listeners, it should cost you more when you have less time. If I give you an hour to find me a truck, it should be more expensive, right? Than if I
Right.
tell you 2 weeks
Right.
in advance, just as an
Right.
analogy. So for the past, really since almost the
12 months.
beginning, yeah, the
Yeah.
beginning of the pandemic, the contract rate has been more expensive than the spot market, which is
Right.
backwards. So likely the contract market will stay until what you're saying around the middle of the year. The spot market will start to come up, and hopefully around the middle of the year they cross to where they should be, where the spot market will again be more expensive than the contract market.
That's the prediction. We think there's something like maybe 6 to 9% more for contract rates to come down, including fuel. They're at 287 now. So you're probably talking about $2.60 a mile by the middle of this year before they start to come back up. New rates coming into routing guides are lower, so they are decreasing, but stubbornly so, because a big component of that is your fuel surcharge when you look at the all-in rate. So contract rates are coming down, but I think again it comes back to being commodity specific. rates are falling faster in reefer, falling in dry van, but they're starting to bottom out and go back up again. They've been increasing for 3 weeks in a row in flatbed, which again is consistent with it's been a much warmer winter. We got, as I said on our show yesterday, people are digging holes in the middle of February when they wouldn't normally because the ground would be frozen. So you got more building activity going on because we've had a warmer winter. And I think that's what's helping drive more volume into the flatbed market. So, yes, we think our short-term rates, we have run 35-day rate forecasts every week, and they show that by the end of February, early March, rates have bottomed out for dry van in particular. Flatbed reefer is a little bit more difficult because we're in that in-between season piece. We're past the retail season, and produce season hasn't yet started, won't start until, March, April period. Not even the volumes that are coming out of Florida, even though they're equal with where they were this time last year, that's not enough to move the national needle.
So let me ask you this on van. So I'm looking at national van rates according to RateView, show this month $227 a mile. When is the last time that we have seen national rates that low?
Now
you're talking at pre-COVID.
Gosh, I'll tell you exactly. I'd have to do some quick math here to take.
I want to say it had to be like 2019.
Yeah,
if I had to guess.
Yeah, I looked at this on the weekend spot rate data graphs. Here we go. All right, so if I take fuel out of it, so you've got to add 55 cents to these numbers, but we were 6 cents a mile below 2018.
Okay.
But 12 cents a mile above 2019.
Okay.
So the way I've characterized the current freight market is, we've got supply in the spot market at about 2020 levels and demand at about 2018 levels. If you think about the volumes that are moving, 2018 was a good year from a demand perspective. But this time in 2020, we were still losing capacity. The industry was still shedding capacity because rates had been falling all of 2019. And capacity was exiting the industry all the way up until the pandemic. And then, of course, the whole world changed. So if we look at the volume of trucks posting their equipment looking for loads on our load boards, it's about exactly where it was in 2020, which is a very loose freight market. Mm-hmm. So that's the mismatch between supply and demand. Demand looks like 2018 levels, but supply has overshot that by a long way because of all of the people that entered the industry during that period from about July 2020 until October last year.
Yep, sounds about right. You got the stats on the FMCSA data? What is that looking like?
Yeah, we look at entries and exits. So what's surprising to a lot of folks is that there's always, people coming and going in the industry. And it's not quite even when you look at it each month. Up until the pandemic, we were adding about 1,000 net new carriers a month. So when you add in all the new carriers, the reactivations, and then the carriers that deactivate or just leave the industry for whatever reason, it's about a net gain each month of about 1,000. When we got to July of 2020, things went crazy. You remember that diesel dropped and rates went through the roof, and that offered this period of incredible profitability for carriers. And if you think about from January of 2014 until July of 2020, we'd added about 1,000 carriers a month. So the industry was always growing. But once PPP loans ended, that accelerated. And at its peak in April of 2021, we added about 8,000 net new carriers in that month.
That's insane.
Absolutely nuts when you look at the charts. Like, we have never seen this amount of carriers. Now, so there's still a lot of them are still in the industry. But when you look at the net between new entrants and exits, it went negative last October. So in October and November, we lost about 2,500 carriers each month, about 1,500 in December. But this month, we've only lost about 1,000 so far. So I guess my point is that it looks like, when you look at the shape of the graph, it looks like the rate of exits has slowed and is turning back towards being positive at the midpoint of February. So, okay. And so if you think about the chart, sort of got this massive hump and it went negative, we lost carriers. We're still losing capacity, net capacity out of the industry. Now, remember, this is interstate. These numbers I'm talking about are interstate carriers, with the exception of Texas and California, because you can do intrastate is long haul also in those states. So I've separated out from those numbers the intrastate short haul component. So that's what it looks like. It looks like we're bottoming out. Yep.
So if you've got, from what I understand is we were losing capacity, right, at the most in the fall. It's still losing it, but it's net almost zero, and it's going to start increasing this month. If you're going to increase
I think once you hit the bottom of the rates and they start to go back up, that's when you're going to see more entrance into it.
Right.
Well, exactly. That's what I was just going to ask, right? Is it the cart before the horse, right? Like, because if the carriers enter the market first, rates aren't going to want to go up because, again, you've got an oversupply on the carrier side. But if they're literally not coming into the market until the rates go up, it's the rates increasing, and then the markets will shift, right?
Man, I wish that this discussion, so like it gives the analytics and the legitimate explanation as to why things have happened the way they have. And I so wish every trolling trucker out there on our Facebook group or wherever that's like, oh, these brokers are screwing us on rates. It's like, we don't control the rates. And the way you just explained it there is precisely clear that, I mean, there's always going to be, you're going to have in a healthy market or a weak or loose market, you're going to have good brokers and good carriers, and you're going to have the bad actors too. You're going to have the broker that is truly screwing and price gouging, and you're going to have the carrier that's doing the exact same thing to someone they can take advantage of. So that stuff happens, but it's the overall, when you look at the trend, it has nothing to do with brokers driving down rates. It is economics. It's literally what it comes down to.
And it's the same people say, DAT's, manipulating the rates. Hey, we don't own a truck. We don't haul freight. Like, so
do people say that? I've never heard that one before.
Yeah, I keep reminding people, these rates are based on loads hauled, which means these rates are based on the rate you agreed to haul that stuff for. Like, it's not rocket science.
I can't tell you how many times I've had that conversation in my career negotiating a load where it's like, listen, like the only reason you're complaining about where the rate is because your peers and colleagues are willing to run the freight for that number. If nobody was willing to, you wouldn't have a transaction, right?
Yeah.
On either side.
It's hard. I've been I know exactly what it costs to run my truck, which is $1.95 a mile. But I've been, when I was out on the road, I know I'd be sitting in a truck stop and everyone's saying, "Oh, no, we're not going to haul cheap freight." And next thing, someone takes off out of the truck stop, and you think, "Damn it! I bet
you're hauling cheap freight, or you're not hauling any freight."
Yeah, I'm thinking, where are you going, dude? You just said
Let me ask you this, Dean. So and we've gotten this question a bit, like where the DAT data comes from. We understand where it comes from. It's loads hauled.
Yep.
But is there, when you look at a spot rate or a 3 to 7 day average, whatever, it's omitting a certain percentage of outliers. Is that correct?
Right. Correct. Yeah. Or the extreme. Do
we know what percentage that is?
I don't. I should know that, but I don't. I don't know what.
I think someone was telling us it was like 15% of 5.
Yeah. I thought it was the 5 on the top or the bottom that Hans had told us. It was somewhere like 5 or 7. I thought it was like the.
Yeah, I thought it was like I'm not a statistics guy, but like 2 standard deviations out.
Well, it is 2 standard deviations. I just don't know what percentage of contributions it is.
Okay.
So
I think that comes out to like 87% of the data is included, or something. I forget. I'm not any of you statistics people out there that are probably shaking your head, laughing at us right now. That's fine.
Well, and I think, and again, but for people out there, because we had this conversation off air a couple weeks ago, and a really good explanation Dean gave, and I think this is helpful for carriers as well as brokers, was I'm like, well, Dean, because we're digging in and we're putting a course together for assets. And I spent, quite a bit of time going through the numbers that Dean's talking about. What does it cost to operate a truck, right? And I'm like, well, Dean, how are their carriers significantly below this number still hauling freight and not losing money? And it was a really simple example. It was basically their trucks were paid off. They didn't have a payment on their truck. So they could operate at least temporarily below everyone else. And
Yeah.
on the other end, you had carriers that had huge truck bills because they bought them at the peak during the pandemic
Yep.
and might have
You got it.
paid 20 or 30% more than everyone else in the
Right.
market paid for their truck,
Right.
right?
Right.
And that makes a whole lot of
And then
sense.
and that explains the net exits, capacity leaving the
Yeah.
industry, because a lot of capacity migrated over to being leased onto a larger carrier, where you're
Hmm.
still going to get on average $2 a mile and avail yourselves of better fuel purchasing programs. But then there were some carriers that just said, I'm going to sell my truck and go and drive a P&D truck for Amazon or something.
Yep.
So that's
Well, and
the
also,
cycle we're in.
and I think for our audience out there, the same thing happened with just consumer vehicles, right? Like if you bought a
Right.
car at
Right.
this peak, like your personal inflation, there was a big article where they showed like your inflation isn't always what that number is. It depends on what you actually bought. Like if you bought a
Right.
house or a car during that time, your personal inflation might have been like 20 some percent because cars were 30% more than they cost
Right.
the year before, the
Right.
same as tractor trailers were.
Right. Right.
Ben, I got your answer. It's 5% total. So
It is 5.
yeah, so it's your top and bottom 2.5%.
Yeah.
That makes
Okay.
sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, so we
Bring it
get
full
our
circle.
contributions in every night. We, because of higher rates last year, we saw about 140 billion in freight spend. It's about a 60-40 split between spot and contract. We get a lot of that data in every night. So we're seeing, about half our rates that are submitted are in our system before the load's delivered. So we're saying, there's not the lag that people would think. It's a 7-day rolling average rate based on, the loads that are being moved in the market. So it's fairly robust in terms of what's happened in the market. Now, our forecasting tool is also pretty accurate, also out to 35 days.
I had another question too related to this is what percentage of the market right now is spot? Because that shifted a lot during the pandemic where I think it peaked at around 30 some percent
Yep.
or like the high
Yep.
20s. And normally, if I remember, it's supposed to be like around what, 7 to 9%? Is that give or take? But I could be.
Yeah. So right now it's probably about, I'm going to say I've got the numbers here. It's probably more like, I'm going to say about 90%, but I think it vacillates some days depending on, the day of the week.
Mhm.
But the data that was fascinating to me is that we had, we pulled some numbers on this the other day, and if I just so we had the volume of spot in the volume of freight moving in the spot market in 2018 was something like 20%.
Okay.
Then it dropped back down in 2019 to about 13% in the
Okay.
spot market. During the worst of the peak of the pandemic, it was as high as 30%, as you mentioned, on our side of the business. But for the rest of the time, most of last year, it stayed relatively high compared to prior times. Normally 90-10 would be the split, right? 90% contract, 10% spot. But
Mhm.
what you'd be seeing right now is more contract freight moving direct to brokers in the spot market. Not like, so shippers are sending more volume direct to brokers.
Purely
So
based off of cost, right?
Because spot's cheaper.
Yeah. So, but when they manage that spend by sending it to brokers at not in the hour they need to move the load, but in advance, you can
Right.
manage your costs. So what they're doing is those low volume lanes. So remember, 80% of your volume moves on 20% of your lanes in the contract market. If you take those ghost lanes out and the lanes that are 1 or 2 loads a month, if you put them into a routing guide, you're automatically going to set yourself up for a tender rejection and a service failure.
Because the trucks
Right.
aren't
So
going to
what
want to run it because it's
the
hit or
chances
miss.
are low, right? So
Yeah.
what they're doing is saying, rather than overpaying for something that we can avoid, let's manage that a little bit more strategically, send the low volume lanes direct to the brokers in the market and get them to manage that part of the business for us, so our procurement costs for spot will be less over time. So that's a new phenomenon in the last year that we've seen on our side of the contract market, is shippers not putting every lane into their routing guide bid, but strategically putting in the high volume lanes. And remember, we started with freight cycles are getting shorter. The shippers knew that during the last RFP that they were less than a year away from the market turning again. And they knew that they couldn't play the market down. They had to stick with their incumbent carriers, and basically both teams sort of agreed to play nicely, which again is not something you normally see when in a in a shipper's market when there's such loose capacity. But that was the difference.
Interesting.
So more volume in spot is a good thing for you guys.
Which is a good thing for all the brokers out there.
All of us.
Good news. And I also heard is some tips for prospecting. These are the things and the questions you want to ask your shippers and your customers when you're talking to them, or prospects, right? Asking questions of, hey, what are maybe some of the lanes that aren't as frequent, the ones or twos or the 3 loads a month on some of these lanes. Hey, we might be able to get you better, consistent, on time percentages at a better cost, right? That's a great value proposition from a brokerage to a prospect.
We've seen it at our company for like the last couple of months. I've seen a handful of customers that they're intentionally moving the 2 to 3 shipments a month, those lanes into a more broker, by intention. Like they're intentionally going to the brokers first instead of like, hey, I need this move right now. So we've seen it, and it makes a whole lot of sense now when you lay it out that way. So
and this carriers like that, because carriers that run on a dedicated lane. Like if you've got someone that's running, from Buffalo to Kansas City and back every week because he wants to be home on a weekend, that's what you want to find. That's the beauty of what you do, is finding those carriers to match that lane.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's interesting. So for all the people that are not big analytics nerds out there, we at least gave you some good takeaways in this numbers style market update episode. So we went over a lot of commodities you can prospect right now, what the market should look like, and I'll just double down on what Ben said. Use this information. And even if you only remember like a couple points out of it, that's fine. But use it in your conversation with your existing customers and prospects, because you're not when you call them and you have a good conversation about what they can expect and you can actually add value. You're different than the guy that's like, hey, I've got a truck in the area, you know what I mean? Which is the standard sales pitch by a freight broker. So that's
Where
good.
do they find you, Dean? And I point and direct all of the clients we work with to you, because this is what you do. You put this out every week. So where can people get more of this?
I'll just throw in if you go to dat.com/market update and download our weekly market update that's there every Tuesday night. So we talk about this on our show on a Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern, the DAT IQ show. We publish a lot of information. We go through the market. We talk about our short-term rate forecast. And then I publish that on a Tuesday night. So essentially what it is, it's a 8 or 9 page long-form version of what we've covered today. Breaks it out by dry bed, flatbed, reefer, has all the spot rates, load to truck ratio, and some comparisons to the last 4 or 5 years, so you can see where rates are, and that's available free. Just go to dat.com/market update, and you can download. I'll just drop that in the chat so you've got it there. So that's where you can get that. It's free, and it's I think it's a good read because it gives you continuity week to week on what the market's doing.
I've seen the DAT IQ. It's live on YouTube, isn't it? Right, streams live.
YouTube and LinkedIn, 10 a.m. Eastern.
Yeah. Yep. Is it you and Ken?
And then we have a special guest on every week.
Okay.
Or every other week. So yep.
Gotcha. Good stuff. Well, we've got some Q&A questions here from our listeners, but first, shout out to our friends over at Lean Solutions Group, another valued partner of ours. Lean is the industry leader in nearshore staffing solutions with offices in South America and elsewhere around the world, including freight broker back office operations, accounting, tech development, business development, marketing, customer service, and many other positions. To learn more about the vast solutions Lean has to offer your freight brokerage or agency, visit them online at www.leangroup.com. That's Lean, Lean, group.com. All right, so the first question here, and these are kind of all over the place today. We got a little bit of everything. This is a dispatcher. So an independent dispatcher asking, how do I find carriers that I can dispatch for? My first thought on this is, well, it's kind of the same way that a freight broker has to go out there and find shippers or customers to provide services to. There's a lot of traditional cold outreach networking. Literally you can find a directory on DAT of carriers based on location. I've seen too, Ben, people are doing it in our Facebook group all the time. They're networking. You get like these small owner operators that are like, hey, here's my equipment type, looking for a dispatcher or a broker to keep me loaded. Or you find dispatching services that are on there just looking to network with folks. There's a whole bunch of ways to network. Ben, have you seen anything else outside of those traditional routes?
I think that really covers that's how they're acquired. But I would like to ask Dean, since he does drive a truck, what are the things that a dispatcher can do to add value? So, I mean, what are they leading with, right? What would make you want to work with a specific dispatcher?
Just honesty, straight up. Never sugarcoat the bitter pill. Tell me exactly how bad and ugly it is. Right? Don't try.
Transparency.
Transparency is critical. Don't try and start with the rosiest of rosy pictures because I've already got my BS radar going off. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Just it's just say tell me how bad it is because what carriers don't want are surprises. They absolutely hate surprises. Tell me how bad it is, and then I'll be fine because I can manage to that. Right. So if it's more than one drop, more than two drops. Like, yep.
So if I'm a small trucking company or an owner operator, why would I want to use an independent dispatcher over just going to find a broker on the load boards? What's the value add of the dispatcher? I mean, I know there's a lot of the paperwork and stuff like that, carrier packets, but is there anything in addition, like Ben said, it's going to add value that they can't get from working just with a broker?
I don't know. My own experience is working with brokers. So I always looked at them as being my outsourced marketing department. They were a line item on my P&L. They were an absolutely critical cost to me to run the business because they were doing all my sales and marketing and work in the background. I can't speak to that.
Where I've seen a good value add in dispatchers, from a broker standpoint, they've got access to capacity that we don't always have, from being posted up on the boards. The other thing from the carrier's point of view is, if they can do a couple things. One, they can do your onboarding process and contracts and stuff like that if you have them contracted to do those duties. So that takes that off your plate while you're driving. But in addition, they're out there shopping, trying to find the best next load for you as a driver based on if there's a certain location you want to get to, or if you're just looking for a really good high-paying load. They're doing all that for you while you're driving. So that's what I've seen. So the folks that were out there in the last year that when everyone's got a little piece of the treasure, right? You got a lot of these dispatchers that popped up and really they just kind of rode the coattails, right? And now that things have shifted in a different direction, if you're not adding value, you're not going to have a job. You're not needed the way that you might have been 12 months ago. So
good point.
That's my take on it. All right, next question. I'm a freight forwarder. How can I improve my sales? I'm cold calling, but it's not that effective. Well, I know it's a freight forwarder, but you could be an asset-based trucking company. You could be a freight brokerage. You could be a dispatcher, whatever, right? If cold calling is the number one most effective way to do our job and to get more business, and it's not effective for you, you're not doing a good job at cold calling. And that could be the quality of your cold calling, or most likely, I'm guessing, is the quantity of your cold calling. Because with quantity tends to come better quality. You're going to develop better. Ben, you coach on this all the time. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
cold calling's not working. Why?
Yeah, effectiveness refers, I guess, how many people are you getting as customers? The thing is, I mean, in our industry, relationships matter above everything else. And if you're not effective, you're not connecting with human beings. You're not getting them to know, like, or trust you. And that's where you want to work on that skill set. And some things outside of just looking for better questions, working with a coach, watching videos on this, listening to podcasts, reading books. There's a ton of resources out there and content, but it's just practicing it also in your day-to-day life, right? I've seen some really good, interesting things where it's like, just try to talk to 5 people a week that you've never met, right? Try to have a conversation with the guy at the pharmacy, with the girl at the grocery store, with the guy delivering your food. The more you can practice that skill set of initiating a conversation is really where the calls are won or lost. And those are things that you can practice every day. That's why, honestly, I feel like people in the service industry, like bartenders and waiters, do so well in sales because they are very adept at that skill set of talking for the first 30 seconds, right? They can connect. They can make you feel warm and comfortable talking with them. You can feel like you could tell them your life story. That's that piece that really determines whether someone's going to be effective or not.
Yep. You're absolutely right. You know what? I'm the kind of guy that, like, when you get the random solicitation at your front door, whether it's someone trying to sell lawn care service or it's Jehovah's Witness, right? I will always talk to them because I just enjoy talking to random people, whether or not I'm going to prescribe or subscribe to their services. So I like that. But you have to practice it, right? You're not even if you don't have a background in being a bartender or service industry. If you do 100 cold calls, you're going to get a little bit better at than you were when you first started. And most likely you'll get a lot better at it. What's that book?
This is a great book. It's called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. It's written by Robert Cialdini. This book was on not Warren Buffett, but his partner. My mind just blanked. His like 5 books you like need to read in business. And the long and short of it is this book is basically this guy in the late 70s or maybe 80s. It's around then. He is a doctorate in psychology and he goes and gets a job in every type of sales and then basically talks about the techniques that he learned that were in those sales techniques and then breaks down how all of the psychology works with all of it. But it's a great book that really shows you how this is done in a lot of different ways.
I like it. All right, final question, and we'll go around the horn on this one. What do you wish somebody would have told you before you became a broker? So I'll just, in general, and before getting into the transportation industry, what is something that you wish someone would have told you? Dean, do you have you got anything? You've been in it the longest out of the 3 of us.
Yeah. I'm not sure this is suitable for...
You can always cut it out. That's all right.
Yeah. It's... if I learned how to sleep properly, I wouldn't have had to take things to stay awake at night. Right? So
interesting.
I nearly killed myself one night trying to stay awake. And that was kind of a turning point. And I just decided that it was better to try and stay awake by taking something than kill myself because it was inevitable. Mm-hmm. And I'd already lost some friends. Friends had fallen asleep at the road and run off the road in front of me. And, that's an awful experience when you're trying to deal with, your best friends that are sort of slumped over a wheel after hitting a tree. But no one ever explained to me that there was another way. And the other way was getting good quality sleep, which is why I came to this country and studied sleep at Harvard and taught sleep classes for the best part of a decade. I didn't know that if you actually learned how to sleep properly, the science of sleep, you could drive all night without any problems. I didn't know that. Nobody knew that in the 80s and 90s. That's the one thing I wished we'd have, figured out a long time ago.
Interesting. And so actually next week, I think we're going to do an episode on like big picture lifestyle of how to succeed in brokerage. And we're going to talk about things like, your health and how you manage, sleep and recharging your batteries per se, stuff like that. Because burnout is real. And if you don't take care of your body, right, don't take care of yourself, does always eventually catch up to you and it will spill over into your professional performance. So that's
absolutely
a good one.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been spending a lot of time actually on that topic for the past few months researching sleep, and it just is astounding. They said if sleep was a pill, it would by far be the number 1 selling drug in the world because it is literally the Swiss Army knife your body has to fix everything.
Absolutely.
And just the quantity is not the same as quality. And even the types of sleep where people say, well, I fall asleep and wake up fine and I'm in bed 7 hours. But then we just had no idea back then whether or not you're getting deep sleep, REM sleep, restorative sleep. And your cognitive ability is like so affected by it that I think it's like if you get like an hour or 2 less sleep, it's like the equivalent of like drinking 3 beers all day. It's something crazy like that. Just how much you lose by not getting good sleep.
Yep. It's critical.
So I'll give my take. So I started off working on the asset side before brokerage. So I'll give, the trucking side has a good analogy or good take on it, Dean. I'm going to give for brokerage side of it. I would say having a mentality, like, have you ever seen the TV show Ted Lasso? One of the lines they use is be a goldfish, talking about how goldfish have they have like no memory, so they can easily forget a bad experience. And they'll move on. They don't hold a grudge. They're not down on themselves because of something bad happened. So there's so much rejection in this industry in sales, on the sales side of brokerage. And there's also so many, it's very, very easy to hold a grudge against a carrier if you're a broker because of one bad experience. And the same thing, I've had a lot of carriers that'll hold a grudge against a broker. And it happens with brokers to shippers and shippers to brokers. So I would say there's, with so much rejection and so much, when tensions get high and people get frustrated, be a goldfish, right? Learn how to be flexible and let it kind of, what's the duck phrase? Like,
be a duck. The one in sales is be a duck, like the water off your back.
Slide off your back like a duck, or whatever it is. But yeah, have a short memory span when it comes to your emotions. That's my advice I'd give. Mr. Kowalski, what do you got?
I would say the one biggest thing that I learned over time that would have been helpful knowing at the onset was just that no matter how good your relationship is with your customer and no matter how much business you're doing with them, it is inevitable. You will likely lose a portion of it or all of it to likely things that are outside of your control. And like, that is a thing that I've seen time and time again is people, again, we talk about this a lot. They get promoted, they go to different jobs, they get fired, a company gets acquired. You might still have a great relationship with that point of contact giving you the business, but they hire a new CFO and all of a sudden they change all of their operations, want to use a different TMS, different criteria, and you go from doing whatever it was to doing 25% of whatever that business is. And again, we say this a lot, but it's just another really good reason why prospecting should not be an occasional activity. You need to be doing this consistently as part of your daily and weekly tasks because, again, no matter how good you're doing, it's inevitable you're going to have loss in your book of business.
I like it. All good tips there. So, well, anyway, Dean, thanks again for for coming back on the show here. I think it's been our third or fourth time. We'll have you on again in the future. It's always fun. Make sure to check out Dean Croke on DAT. I know we said dat.com/market update. That's where they find you. Is that correct? All your information?
Correct.
Fun stuff.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, so definitely check out Dean. Dean, any last thoughts? Any last bit of info you want to toss out there?
Yeah, I think, dare to be different. One of the things you can do in sales is not do the same thing that everyone else is doing. I've always been very successful in business by not following the pack, at doing the exact opposite of what every other trucker's doing. If they're heading in one direction, I'm heading in the other. So that's where the opportunities are on the margins, not because no one's home at the average.
Love that.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Good stuff. All right. Well, that'll be it for this episode. Again, next week, we're going to get into some good big picture stuff on how to improve yourself as a broker. Ben, any last final thoughts here?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. If you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.